and finished 4 months later with the Treaty of Paris, which concluded the Spanish-American War, but set the stage for the Philippine-American War. Tom finished summing up the answer to Deshin's question and looked at the class. The girls were busily writing notes or focused on him. Except for Desala. Tom cursed in his mind. Why had the girl taken this class? She had given up flirting, which was something of a relief, but while her grades overall seemed to be good, her efforts fell off dramatically as soon as he took the floor. She was unfeignedly attentive to Mivere, but her respect for his time fell between negligible and non-existent. It seemed plain that Desala was dismissing him because he was a human. While bothersome, her scores would give her away. No, the real issue was Desala making herself a disruptive influence on the others. While Letzi was the most susceptible, the girl had a genuine talent for putting most of the class into a twist. Thankfully, Letzi was growing more engaged, but mitigating the problem wasn't fixing the problem. He just couldn't figure out a way forward with Desala, short of confrontation. It sucked, but if the girl wasn't going to meet him halfway, there weren't a lot of options other than letting her just coast, and he wasn't ready to admit defeat and let that happen. Not yet, anyway. Just now, Desala sat glued to her omnipad, a grin fixed upon her face. Whatever was holding her attention, it wasn't the Treaty of Paris. With a few minutes of class left, Tom sighed inwardly and began walking up the steps. Situational awareness seemed to be on Desala's side today. She swiped at the screen on her pad and set it down, looking at him with a cocky smile. Miss Desala. Tom strolled to the mid-tier. Over the last few days, we've compared the assimilation of smaller countries during Shul's early industrial age with conflicts on Earth. The Boer War, the Spanish-American War, and so on. A few days ago, I asked your thoughts regarding the Spanish-American War. And you haven't volunteered a word since, he added in his thoughts. Yes, Professor Warwick, she nodded dutifully. Please give me your summary of the motivations for these conflicts. Well, they were all attempts to consolidate territory and resources. Desala sounded a bit hesitant, but rallied. The dominant empires were contending with each other by establishing control over valuable resources and territory. Thank you, Mr. Sala. Tom nodded thoughtfully. It was time to give her a bit of a push. Now, what are your thoughts on how those territories were treated after they established control? There were tensions. She stalled, took a breath and started over. The American Empire wanted territory and took it from the Spanish Empire, while the British were fighting over resources, gold and diamonds. Those are the causes, and that would have been an excellent answer to the question I asked several days ago. Tom almost furrowed his brows, but there didn't seem any benefit from beating on the girl. He'd asked clearly. She either didn't know, or was hedging until the clock struck the hour. What are your thoughts on how those territories were administered in the piece that followed? Desala swallowed, but kept her eyes on him. I think they were well administered, Professor. The empires were still consolidating, and you pointed out that communications were very difficult at that time on your planet. Despite both nations being pushed into consecutive conflicts in the same lands, over much the same reasons. The girl opened her mouth a few times. He did not want to get into a conflict, but it was getting ridiculous. Rather than make it contentious, he lightened his tone. Mr. Sala, your command of the facts is improving, but I am asking for you to move beyond those. I want you to use them as assets and construct an informed opinion. When I ask you a question, I expect you ready to educate me. Since I suspect this might be a difficult issue for even the best of you, he said, raising his voice, the class will have a paper ready for the end of the week discussing the origins of these conflicts. 2,000 words. By the class of the next, ladies. Tom could hear a few audible groans as he stepped back down to his desk, but a paper had been scheduled, regardless. Any final questions for Professor Pelavon or myself? As he reached his desk, Mivere might have quirked an eyebrow at him, but it was so subtle he couldn't be certain. Since this shell, he was second-guessing their relationship a lot more than he used to. Still, no questions came. Very well. Thank you, ladies. Class is dismissed. Belder got out her omnipad with a grin as class ended and snorted as Desala stalked out of the classroom. Priscilla leaned over as some of the others began converging on them. You've been grinning half the class, Willist. Pris had taken to calling her that sometimes, which was fair enough since she was from Atherton. Let's see this guy. Belder waved at Nesta to invite her over, but it looked like she needed a word with Professor Warwick. He was watching Professor Pelavon as she departed from the hall, which was odd. They usually left together, and Belder worried about that. The two had never left the class separately. If Professor Pelavon was, well, that didn't signal anything good. Come on, Pris nudged her. Half the girls have been talking about him since the day before yesterday. Let the rest of us get a look. Sure. It wasn't like she didn't want to share. She could still jump for joy about the date, and they were planning another. She reeled herself in, though. She owed Professor Warwick for his advice, and if he and Professor Pelavon were having problems, well, she could at least keep the others distracted. How about I show you over lunch? I'm starving, she asked. Most of the others brightened at the idea. I can spend more time telling you about him that way. That got approval, but Scifi heaved a sigh. I have to get over to the pool for practice. It's hot out today. Why don't we meet there? Deshin offered, and Scifi perked up hopefully. Belder had come to know Desi and Seth over the last few weeks, and she'd been surprised at how tight the two were, despite their differences. Right now, that was just the suggestion she needed. Anyway, she was the keeper of the boy videos. That had to be worth picking where she gave up her news. She's right. It is hard. Let's grab something at the cafe and meet there in 20 minutes. Have I ever got something to show you? Nesta was curious, and wanted to join the others as they crowded around Belder. Just walking down to Professor Warwick by herself made her feel so conspicuous she could die. She looked back at Belder, who was waving at her to come over, but only nodded in return. She told herself it was a mixed blessing. If the other girls weren't about, they couldn't overhear. That would be too embarrassing to live down, and she swallowed as she reached Professor Warwick's desk. He paused in the middle of packing up as she reached him. Miss Nesta? Ah, Professor? She looked down at the desk to avoid meeting his eyes. Her mother had bartered her whole life in exchange for a profitable way of getting back at Professor Warwick, who was just standing there looking at her expectantly. The whole situation sat on her stomach like a painful knot. This man had bartered himself for her benefit with nothing to gain, and now Mother Mavisti has something planned to ruin him. It wasn't fair, and she didn't know what to say. But she had to say something. Is everything all right, Nesta? No, sir, she said quietly, as the girls gathered around Belder before all heading out together. I need to talk to you, please. It's about this coming shell. So this was good advice, Balondi grinned, as she bobbed on the surface. It really was. Kellar tread water and nodded in blissful relaxation. I've been looking at the pool since I arrived, but I've been so busy I couldn't get down here. I could give you a hand if you like, Lark, offered Deshin. I've sort of been thinking. Well, Lark blinked and looked at the others. I'm keeping up, really. Everyone paused as Scifi leapt from the diving tower, arcing gracefully before sipping into the water, with barely a ripple. Goddess, she's good. Desi hooked an arm over the lip of the pool. Anyway, it's not like that. I have an edge by helping the professor, and I'm up on the rest of my classes. I just thought if we all get together and compare notes as a study group. Lark bit her lip, but nodded. If it's something for everyone, I'd like that. Most of my classes are alright, but economics of house management has been a real chore. It's not so bad, said one of the twins as the other nodded, though Professor Hrammery can be a real Grimshaw. I have great notes for that one, Jaxby chimed in. I'm already trading them with Priz. Priscilla nodded just before dunking her head under and pulling her hair back. When she surfaced, she nodded. It feels like my mothers have been teaching me that stuff since I could walk. I could help with that one. Beside them, Scifi exploded to the surface beside Deshin, a fierce grin on her face. How was that one? She asked. Looked good, but it was only a 2.5 somersault with 2.5 twists. Deshi shrugged. Only? Kellock asked incredulously. She didn't even make a ripple. It's all right. I've been telling her to be picky. She's harder on me than the coach. Scifi grinned and splashed over at Desi. Anyway, I have another 5 minutes before I get the board again. What's everyone talking about? Desi's putting together a study group, said Melondi. And Belder's been trying to figure out what to do about another date, quipped one of the Kerbal girls. The other nodded. She's moping about keeping up with him for 10 minutes now. As if anybody could. Belder looked back in mortified defiance. If he hadn't stopped after 5 dances, I'd have fallen over. The Kerbal girls grinned, and Belder growled in frustration. It's not fair. I loved the dance, but I'd never seen anyone do that before. If he hadn't been such a good partner, I'd have looked like a drunken Turok. Why not take him swimming? Chirped Desi, before stifling a laugh at Belder's look of horror. Come on! You said he asked to go out again, and then he kissed you. Twice! You might get to see him in a wet shirt. Belder's eyes seemed to glaze over. I don't know. His big sister. Don't be silly, Priscilla said confidently. Since she let you be alone with him on a first date, for a second date, you definitely need to invite her along to show respect. And to see if her family is a good potential match, added Melondi with a nod. But what should we do? Making it his choice for what we did worked out, but we can't take her dancing. I'd have 2 left feet if she was watching me all night. Professor Warwick has been doing it every other day, Deshin shrugged. He says it's still hot enough to fry eggs on a sidewalk. She rolled her eyes at the bewildered looks. The point is that it's still hot for a human, so they might like it. She's right. Ask if they can swim, then offer. Priz nodded sagely. I mean, the worst thing that can happen is they say that they don't, and you find something else to do. You've seen the professor swim, right? Scifi glanced around the circle. I mean, he's getting better. But if you want to look graceful to a human, swimming is a really good idea. I could try, but how do I look good to him? As soon as I dive in, my hair will be a mess. Well, Professor Pelavon told me that human men really like a girl in what they call a bikini. So, this opera is just like ours? Jaxby asked, as she passed around the snack bowl. It was the first night of the study group, and in general opinion it was incredibly useful. After 2 hours, the group had caught up, and were breaking out into their individual work while conversation picked up. It kind of is, Melondi nodded enthusiastically. He lent me a video file of one he took Professor Pelavon to see, called Spirit of the Theatre. It's really good. But you don't speak his language, and the translators... Jasmine looked back at her doubtfully, I mean, they're good for the movies, but something like that? You just have to listen. I mean, I know I'm in the choir, but you just have to appreciate the voice and deal with the translation as you can. He's so good it gave me chills. Malondi's tongue flickered out to snag one of the bagoon puffs before the bowl moved on. It's a really good story. So, what's it about? Asked Eshin, as she stretched on the floor and closed down her omnipad. Well, it's about a man. Is he cute? Nessa broke in with a lecherous grin. No, and he doesn't take his shirt off. Malondi rolled her eyes at Nesta's disappointment. That's the whole point. He's an incredible musician and singer, but his face is terribly scarred. He wears a mask and hides it in the basement of the theatre, but then he falls in love with a woman and romances her by teaching her to sing. That could be all right, conceded Nesta, which only made Malondi roll her eyes again. So he's like a night crew cave singer? Asked Kellock. Look, I could talk about the differences between cave singing and Shilvanti cliff singing all day, started Malondi. She can. She really can, said Kamara dryly. Stop her before she gets started. Her? I had to listen to both of you, said Kaslin, as she rolled over on the couch. Fine, I'll keep it short. You know Shilvanti cliff singers need to have powerful voices so they can be heard over the surf, and night crew cave singers have amazing control and pitch? I suppose, Belder shrugged when Malondi shot her a look. I just know what I like, all right? Heathen, Malondi sniffed. Anyway, this human has a voice that will make any cliff singer proud, but it's like he is hiding away in a cave from the rest of the humans. Now, that makes more sense. Belder arched her brow at Malondi. Sorry, but really, who could hide in a basement? She isn't wrong, said one of the twins, before heaving an exasperated sigh and pushing away her paperwork. And I give up on this flyer for the show. It's just a list of the acts, but it looks dull. I'm an engineer, not a graphic designer. Why not let Lark have a look at it? Kellock peered up from her notes and grimaced. If you want something for audio or video, sure, but that's not so much. Leslie is, though. We're in the media club together. You could ask her? Sure. If you can pry her away from Desala, Jaxby grimaced, as she offered the snack bowl. Leslie isn't bad, Jax. Deshin grabbed for the bowl as it drew near. It's only that Desala latched onto her during her first year. She's pretty nice on her own. I might as well. If we're going to make the show look good, we need it all to look good, offered Kamara. Speaking of which... Tandri looked over at Jaxmi and Kamara as the student council meeting was wrapping up. So now we have 10x sorted, as long as the IOTC girls come through as promised. I heard that, growled one of the other council girls. Jaxmi recognized Shalara, one of the fourth-year girls on the council, who was always pushing the interior officers' training cadre. Everyone knew that was her career choice after graduation, and the IOTC had Paul, but Jaxmi didn't care for the girl. Good, because I meant that, Tandri shot back coolly. Those batons are a lot different to rifle drills. If your girls can't adapt and act, then we need time to change the program. Kamara can go ahead and print out the program, Shalara said dismissively. We'll be ready. I'm holding you to that. Tandri looked down at her pad. That just leaves the costumes. You've got some interesting designs, Jaxmi, but why not turn over the files and let the girls print them off for fitting? It won't work that way, Jaxmi tried to explain. We have something special we want to do for all of the students, not just the performers, but the orchestra and the choir too. Right, this silk you keep going on about, nodded Tandri. We only have a few weeks left. Look, you and Kamara convinced us to do this for the student show, and we're all in, but we're going to look ridiculous if we don't have the costumes ready. We will, Jaxmi protested, and tugged, absently, at the silk scarf around her neck. It's just very special material. It's incredibly strong and durable. I already have the specifications on how to work it, but there's nothing like it. I tested the... Look, we've all admired your scarves, growled Shalara. But I don't plan to look silly because you can't come through. So if you aren't getting this wonder stuff in time, you need to tell us now. Jacksmith scanned the girls around the table. Her message to Uncle Jemsy would have arrived by now, on the fast packet couriers. She had sent him every credit she had, but it would still take time for him to collect what she needed and ship it back. Now the girls were losing patience, but they weren't being fair. She put on her best smile. If it will make you happy, I can have some alternative outfits ready, but I did tell you how long it would take. You did, nodded Tandri. But Shalara is right too. You've worked up a lot of the girls over this. If you don't come through, it's going to be on your shoulders. And you can forget running for the student council, Shalara tossed in. Screw this up and you won't be able to promise your way out of that. It doesn't matter how many girls vote for you. If the council doesn't want to... All right, Shalara, Tandri sighed. She gets the idea. There's no need to be blunt. It will be here. It just needs time. You can trust my house, Jacksmith said, with all the confidence she didn't feel, and hoped she wouldn't need to sue her face for slander. Tom grimaced and closed his omnipad. Miv had texted to beg off. Again. She'd been dodging him all week since they'd gotten back to the academy. Something was seriously off. And, given that the whole weekend with Miv and Shalea could fall under seriously off, there was no shortage of options. With nothing else to do, and in the mood for company, he set out for a walk along the commons, hoping to clear his mind. He dambled along, not quite certain what to do with himself. Lad? Tom? Hearing his name snapped him out of his reverie, and he looked up along the path. Not far off, Jama Hameres waved him over. You look like you were lost in your own universe. Sorry. Tom strolled over to the elderly Shorvanti and settled down on the bench beside him. I've had a lot on my mind since Shell, but I've been meaning to drop by. Ah, well, you're here now. So what's weighing on you? Work, or that fine young lady friend of yours? The elderly Shorvanti seemed dressed for a cool fall evening, with a light jacket pulled close around himself, even though the temperature was probably just breaking 80 degrees. Tom chuckled as he leaned back and stretched, the dying heat of late afternoon coaxing him into an easy state of relaxation. You get right to the point, don't you? At my age, I've given up mucking about. Jama reached into a bag beside him and pulled out a plover, offering it to Tom. At his hasty refusal, Jama took a bite. So, I'm guessing it's mostly her. I suppose. Mostly. I've been dealing with a girl in class that treats me like I'm some caricature of a teacher. She takes me there seriously, but not me. I don't want to say it's my race or my gender, but I'm starting to think it's one of them. Tom kicked a pebble, sending it skittering to the grass. And yes, Miv has been... well, I suppose Miv has been fine. I'm sure it's me that's not getting it. Things have been strained the last few days, and I expected Shorvanti would know what the matter is, but I haven't got a clue. Sort of. Sort of. Jama gazed sidelong at him for a moment before closing his eyes, to bask in the sun, which means you sort of do. I have some ideas, Tom sighed. Can you keep a secret? Pfft. Jama clasped his hands over his chest. I thought we were done mucking about. It's not my secret to tell. Tom kicked another rock across the pavement as he considered the weekend. Ah, now, that's different. Jama nodded. At least the art of discretion isn't dead. Anything you tell me stays with me, right? Fair enough. Tom gathered his thoughts. So Miv took me home and introduced me to... well, her wife. She didn't divorce her co-wife after her husband died. Oh-ho! Jama opened an eye and grinned. Well, well, So, you went shopping and got 2 for the price of 1? I... kind of, Tom choked out. Turning the shell over in his mind, he wanted to hedge around the matter, but... well, pretty much, yes. It was kind of rough, but I agreed to a date with her co-wife to get to know her. Didn't sleep with her then? Just a date? He arched an eyebrow and grinned. What? No. Tom floundered a bit. I mean, she's very pretty. But I was busy trying to cope without looking like an idiot. You don't get things like that on Earth, and I think I did pretty well just wrapping my head around it and agreeing on a date. The last time I was taken home by a girl, I found out I slept with her mother 20 years before. Jama settled back on the bench with a sly smile. Fortunately, the former wasn't the product of the latter, but goddess if that didn't make for an interesting evening. Anyway, a date is good. Very proper way to press forward, that. It seemed like the right move to me, Tom nodded pensively, as he looked for another pebble to send flying. I thought so at the time, but she's been distant since we got back. I'd have sworn it would have made her happy. Jama sighed and opened his eyes. I tell you not to be too upset about what a woman is thinking, but some of them do it better than others. Your Mavere is a thinker and no mistake. If you haven't spoken much, then she's probably overthinking things. We had a good time talking on the ride back to campus, and I thought we had smoothed things over. I don't know what's eating at Mavere, though. Tom paused as a muffled boom rumbled over the grounds. What is that, anyway? I've heard that every couple of days since I arrived. A firing range for the IOTC is over that way. Jama nodded vaguely off to the east. That's probably one of young Akimie's Zarin's doings. Teaches physics, but that girl enjoys her explosions. Says it impresses the students. But Garnier insisted she use the training ground after they had to repaint the second floor of the science building. Jama chuckled at the memory, but gave Tom a sympathetic look. As far as your problem student, have you considered challenging her a bit more? I put a lot of questions her way. Tom stewed a bit, but shook his head. She isn't engaging, and she started being disruptive in class. Well, lad, if she isn't responding to that, you might need to go a bit above the expected. Show her you're serious by doing something more challenging. Go off the books and do something that gets her thinking. Something a bit thought-provoking. The curriculum we have seems to be challenging the other girls. Don't be afraid to invest yourself. At least until you find out if this girl is going to respond. If she doesn't, then you have your answer. But you'll be able to look yourself in the mirror, knowing you've done your best. You can't fix everyone's problems. That's true. Tom turned the thought over in his mind a bit before nodding. I just don't want to give up before I'm sure I've done all that I can. Best thing for it. You're a guide in the wilderness, but no matter what you do, some people are still determined to fall into a Grinshaw pit. Jarman nodded, as he reached in the bag for another plover, which he shook at Tom. It's alright to have doubts and consider your actions, but don't let them take you over. Once you do that, you've made yourself a candidate for mediocrity. Jarman chuckled and leaned over. If that fails, you can always play the man card. The what? Oh, come now. Jarman tutted with amusement, as if talking to a child. You're a man in a woman's school. That gives you pull. As long as you don't overplay it, a man could wrap most of these girls around his little finger. Jama? Tom grinned at the flash of wicked mischief that had crept over Jama's face, but he smiled ruefully. That's just not how I was raised. I mean, I bet you're right, but that's just not me. It may not be, but don't throw a perfectly good trowel out of your kit, just because you're used to a shovel. Jama looked at him speculatively. You just think about it, lad. Tom shook his head, grinning at the idea. This is what he'd needed ever since the weekend. Jama spoke up again. So, how do you feel about her, lad? And no, I don't mean your student. Ugh, Jama, You could have let me enjoy the moment a bit. Tom grimaced, and laid his head back on the bench, then huffed. No mucking about? You're catching on. Jarman nodded and took a bite of his plover, regarding the fruit as he chewed. Starting to, at least. She's been dodging me all weekend since we got back, leaving me chasing my thoughts. I think she's given me time to decide how I feel about all of this. Tom hunched over. The intimacy has been good. Really good. She's the best friend I've had since I lost my wife. She laughs at my jokes, puts up with my music. I think I could burn water and she'd say she likes my cooking. She's funny, she's kind. She steals the covers, she snores. Her lips taste like plover for an hour after eating one of those damn things. Tom caught Jarman's eye and shrugged. Sorry, but those things are awful. On top of that, she has a wife that looks at me like I'm the floor of a taxicab, so the vote is still out there. And she has an agenda over things in her life I don't think I came equipped to understand. So, basically a normal, healthy relationship. Is it? Maybe for Shivanti, but I'm still new to this whole idea of polygamy. And now we're back to mucking about. Jarman took out another plover and flourished it theatrically. You're in the deep end, lad, but you have more depth to you than a puddle. Any woman, much less a married pair, is going to have more standards than just your cock. Any romance that's only based just on sex is doomed to fail. For goddess' sake, man. They're women. They're sentient. Of course they have their own agenda. If you were expecting life with someone to never have its ups and downs, either you humans have been blessed by nature, or you seriously need therapy. Tom gave a snort. Trust me, humans aren't blessed that way. People argue, disagree, fuss. Our women are our partners, not servants. I never expected Mevere to agree with me all the time, but another wife? I never saw that coming. I don't even have context for that. Well then, get your head around this wife of hers. People are protective when it comes to the people they love, and Mevere is a good woman. I expect her Cloley Pabarine isn't an exception. Just because you have an issue with her, that doesn't mean she's toxic. A lot of the biggest issues in any relationship are outside forces. Money, work, distance. So you have different customs from us. Stop mucking about and make it work. Jarman shook his head. I'm glad I'm too old for this sort of thing anymore. I'm too young, and too old. Tom felt bleak and clasped his hands, stopping himself from wringing them in frustration. Pulling them apart, he looked over at Jarman miserably. I'm too old because I can't be certain my fears aren't just ghosts of my past, and I'm too young not to be tormented by them anyway. Tom sighed unhappily as he looked down toward the ocean. It was a beautiful late afternoon, but somehow he didn't feel like he was seeing it. I didn't think I'd ever have to go through this sort of thing again, and now I don't even know what the rules are. But do you love her, lad? Jarman asked quietly. Yes. Yes, I do. Well, sex and lust are a great start, but no lasting relationship exists just to make your dick hard, Jarman huffed. If you're all done twisting yourself in knots, then deal with her wife and sort it out. Tom drew out the map and turned to face the class. Just before class, he'd had a few words in with Mevere about talking after the coming shell, but it was frustrating as hell. Over the week, she'd taken to departing the classroom a minute or two before he wrapped up. As much as he wanted to confront her before this morning's class, there was nothing good down that road, and he knew it. Now, there was just enough time to finish up class, get back to his apartment, and meet his ride into the capital. That left no time to find out what was eating at her, but at least she'd agreed. Anyway, he had tonight and tomorrow with Mavisti Roche, and an interview. Joy. The class was looking at him for his closing remarks. Nesfa looked at him attentively. And suddenly, it was a joy. Nesta had been on pins and needles the first day after Shell, when she told him her mother was planning something. Even mortified to her core, she'd come to tell him. Half a foot taller than Tom, and looking ready to shrink in on herself and disappear. She'd come to tell him anyway. Tom smiled at the class, but at that moment, his smile was for Nesta. She was a good kid, risking everything she wanted just to tell him about her mother. That took courage and character. Whatever was coming was worth it. Nesta deserved something good in her life. There was no better present you could give someone than a future. As for the rest of the girls... Tom's smile turned a bit glassy as Mavere slipped out the side door, and more than a few of the girls noticed looking back his way. Most. Though not Desala, who seemed just as obvious as ever. What was Jama's advice about this? Challenge her? Fine. Alright, ladies. I'm going to wrap up for the day, but after some consideration, I'm changing the topic for your assignment. He raised his voice, making sure Desala was paying attention. Over this past week, Professor Pelavon discussed the consolidation of nations on Shill into one planetary empire. I discussed similar episodes with the nations of Great Britain and the United States. In particular, the recurring Boer Wars and the Spanish-American and Philippine-American Wars. While your paper was to be a review, I intend to challenge you. Tom looked over the girls. As a part of the Philippine conflict, you will find references to the American policy over the control and government of the Philippines, known as benevolent assimilation. For midweek, I want 5,000 words, exploring this policy and its consequences. Do you have any questions? That caused a stir, as the girls took note of the new topic. Deshin raised her hand first. Professor, are there any particulars you want us to look at? No. You're encouraged to use your discretion as you explore the policy, as it was relevant on Earth, the Shovanti Empire during its consolidation on Shill, or within the Shovanti Imperium today. Hands raised at that. Desala's wasn't one of them, but he waited a moment. He had her attention at least. I see a number of you have questions. Mr. Sala? Canting her head in surprise at being called, she took a moment. I didn't have my hand up, but you mean during the consolidation era on Shill, right? Mr. Sala, you may use that. However, I mean a comparison to then, or to the present day. Tom saw more than a few girls exchange furtive glances, and he pressed on, focusing on Desala Sehat. Let me stress that I have been teaching you using the Socratic method. This is your opportunity to demonstrate understanding. I consider it the most important part of your education on humanity. While you've been learning events and dates, my concern has been teaching you about how humanity thinks. As such, I consider this paper of particular significance. It gives you the chance to demonstrate not what you have learned, but how. To show if you have learned anything in this class, and if you can put what I've been teaching you into practice. I expect you to press yourself to the limits of your ability, to demonstrate the brilliance that got you into this academy. Do not disappoint me. Tom looked at the vehicle that had pulled up in front of his apartment, and had a flashback to the opening of Spaceballs. It looked as if someone had stretched out a Bentley and fed it steroids. He had seen the personal vehicles of the great and the good on pre-term day, so he knew this wasn't the most ostentatious thing on the road, but still. This thing is frickin' huge, he muttered, as he drew to a stop a few feet away. Thank God it's not purple. The driver got out and looked him over with a pleasant smile. Professor Warwick, I've been sent to collect you. Easily over 8 feet tall, she was the tallest Shovanti he'd ever met. Tom gulped and reached for his bag, and nearly buried his face in her chest as she moved to take it. I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name. He yielded the bag with as much grace as he could muster, a surreal feeling creeping over him. Shorvanti generally had a few inches on him, but this was the first time he'd felt short since his teens. She blushed, quickly setting the bag in the trunk. I haven't given it yet, Professor. My name is Messeri. Stepping back to the car, she pulled open the door for Tom with an open smile. Lady Richet instructed me to give you the full treatment. The full treatment? He couldn't quite bring himself to call it a limousine, but as he peered inside, it seemed to fall somewhere between that and a luxury family van. Comfortable, but still. Good grief, this is bigger than a New York apartment. Messeri looked in and back at him, and her smile seemed to get a bit more genuine. I don't know where that is, but I think I get the idea. All this for me? Tom looked inside. It was reasonably tasteful, if on the plush side, but he balked. I don't suppose I could sit up front with you? The blue returned to Messeri's cheeks in force. Well? Calling Jama's advice to mind, Tom put on his best smile and looked at her in what he hoped was a winsome manner. He'd never done winsome before, and wondered if he looked like he had heartburn. I've only been off campus 3 times since I arrived, and I'd love to see out front. Please? And plus we could get to know each other on the drive. Well, it is a long drive, she stammered, as her eyes grew wide. If you're sure, the lady sent the family car so you'd be comfortable? I'm sure I'll be very comfortable up front with you, and I really would enjoy the view, he said, nodding firmly. Besides, I feel silly sitting in back trying to talk to you when it's just the 2 of us. That sounds nice. If you're sure. Lady Richet says you're in my hands for the next 3 days for anything you need. And anyway, I drove Miss Nesta home last shell. She said you've been very kind to her, so the whole staff is looking forward to meeting you, Professor. She's a nice girl. I hope I don't disappoint you. And please, call me Tom. The woman actually blushed deeper. I couldn't do that, sir. Well, how about dropping the Professor and the Sir, at least for the drive? Tom took a half step back and grinned, before darting around to open the passenger's side door, before Messeri could stop him. I'm calling you by name, so fair's fair. So how about I tell you anything you want to know, and you can tell me about you and the Richets? I'd love to hear about Nesta when she was younger. Mevere sat in her apartment and tried to ignore her omnipad. Shell with Tom and Shalea had started badly, but seemed to improve, with Leia agreeing to a date with Tom. It hadn't been smooth, but it was working. But now, he was going out with Mavisti Richet. It was bad enough that he tried talking to her during the week, but she already knew Tom wasn't prepared for what was coming, and Mevere didn't want to explain. It wasn't being lazy or neglecting him, but after all the invitations he turned down during pre-term, it was galling. She knew why he was going to see Lady Richet, and the bargain he made to help Nesta. It had been kind, selfless, and so utterly stupid that she could scream. Most of the time, Tom was everything that was missing from her life, but others, it was like those terrible jokes. Don't worry if you don't know what a man is thinking, they don't do it very often. He could just be so oblivious. Mevere huffed. At times like this, she'd usually talk with Shalea. She was her best friend in the world, and whenever one of them had a bad day, they'd call. Now, she was walking on eggshells over a man, and cut off from talking to her co-wife, her best friend, over him. Honestly, it was maddening. This mess had to be a human thing. After balking at something any Shorvanti man would have simply taken in stride, Tom had somehow managed to find a sensible way forward with Leia. It was luck, if not judgment. At least, not Shilvanti judgment. And now? Now he was off on a long weekend with a noblewoman. And bitch that she had all the money, connections and clout House Pelavon never possessed. Mevere inherited a respected title that was a shadow of his Hakilon days. It was rich in honor, but since Chandra had died, that was all. Her income became little more than a stipend, as Pelavon assets were slated for eventual transfer to her niece. It was humiliating. Tom was falling right into the clutches of a woman who had everything she needed to what? Mevere thumped the pillow beside her with a fist in frustration. Even for a man from a newly opened planet, she still didn't really think Mavisi Richer was going to turn Tom's head. She didn't want to believe it would happen. It still felt like it could, though. And not being able to talk to Shalea? Leia wouldn't say, "I told you so," but she didn't know Tom either. Their introduction had been rocky, and this wasn't the kind of thing she could share. Not unless she wanted to prime their date into becoming another disaster. Was it? Mevere picked up the Omnipad. "Leia, do you have a moment?" The Omnipad pinged. "Yes, Miv. I'm glad to hear from you. I was just awful last weekend and I haven't been able to pick up the pad. I'm sorry. And I've been trying to find the nerve to apologize." Mevere sighed. If not for this damn weekend, things could still work out. Ignoring the situation and avoiding Tom had only made things worse. But Leia was blaming herself. "It's okay. I love you. But I think I've just taken the prize for most awful. What happened?" "Tom is off doing something noble but stupid. I got angry and didn't talk to him about it. I don't think I let the fish out of the net, but I definitely lost my grip." "Miv, I talked to him. He seems sure about you. What's going on? Call me?" Mevere felt a sense of relief, like she surfaced after a long dive. It was fragile, yet it washed over her as she called.